You're such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is about the burning of the Pettit family. A crime so horrific it was the community's equivalent to 9/11. 7 hours of torture with a brief moment of hope, only for that all to be ripped away when no one came to help, even at the sound of their screams. I also want to thank Ava's Manor for sponsoring this portion of the video. Ava's Manor is actually an app, and she is actually a mystery writer whose relative mysteriously vanishes. And so you're going throughout the game trying to find clues and trying to find where this relative went. You can play Solitaire Tri-Peaks to progress the story of the character Ava Mendez. It's honestly the best for when you love true crime, but your mental health just can't take a real life case. So you can play this game so you still get your true crime fix, but it's not at the risk of, harming your mental health. And it's still a fun little thing you can do. It's relaxing and it doesn't take too much of your energy or your effort. You can also decorate the manor however you like throughout the game, which I think is the coolest part. And if you want to try, it's actually free to download using my link down below. So make sure you just click that link down below and you will get a free download. So thank you to Ava's Manor for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2007 in Connecticut, and the Pettit family lived in a place called Cheshire. Now this was a town full of farming communities and suburbs with close-knit families. Everyone loved each other in this community, and they weren't necessarily a tiny town, but they were still full of loving families who knew one another and took care of one another. But the Pettit family was William, who went by Bill, and Jennifer, who had 2 children, Hayley and Michaela, who were 17 and 11 years old. Now, Bill and Jennifer had met 22 years prior when Bill was actually a medical student at the same hospital Jennifer was working as a nurse. They would talk about how they met, and it was a really funny story because Bill actually had gone up to Jennifer. He thought she was so beautiful and he wanted to show her how to take blood pressure. However, he only had about 3 minutes of experience doing so, and Jennifer had way more. She had been working for quite a long time, and so he instantly messed it up, and Jennifer had to take over and do it for him. But she didn't make a big deal about it. She was very patient with him and just taught him, and so that's how they immediately met, and then they got married that same year. Jennifer was kind of someone everyone gravitated to. She was a smart young woman. She was caring, she was kind, and she was patient, and Bill was a committed hard worker. And by 2007 this family was happy and content. 48-year-old Jennifer was working as the co-director of a health center at a local boarding school, and 50-year-old Bill was working as a doctor. He had finally gotten his degree, and he was specializing as an endocrinologist at Connecticut Central Hospital. Their eldest daughter, Hayley, was a determined young girl. She had gotten straight A's all through school. She also played cross-country basketball, and she was the leader of an athletic association head, but she also planned to study medicine like her parents at Dartmouth College, which was where Bill had gone. But she had also started a fundraiser called Hayley's Hope that was helping people with multiple sclerosis, and the research toward that, and all the money was going to that. She was keeping none of it. And she was so passionate about this because her mother Jennifer had actually been diagnosed with this when she was 9 years old, and she kind of took it into her own hands because she desperately wanted her mother to survive. And so she started doing this when she was only 9. She was writing letters to friends and family asking them to sponsor a walk she was putting on, and by this point she had raised over $55,000 towards research. This actually won her the Exceptional Community Service Award at her school, yet Hayley didn't brag about anything she did. None of her friends even knew. She told no one because she just wanted to help. She didn't want that recognition. Her younger sister Michaela was known to be loving and gentle and thoughtful. She was kind of a little more shy, and especially around other adults, but if anyone ever needed help, she was right there to help no matter what they needed. She also loved watching cooking shows, and she would often cook for the entire family. It was just something that was a passion of hers that came so easily for her. Michaela also wanted to continue on Hayley's hope when Hayley went to college and could no longer do it, and she was going to rename it Michaela's Miracle. The entire family was willing to do whatever it took to help out other people, and they wanted to make sure everyone around them was happy and healthy. It was second nature for them. They had hearts of gold. Yet they would be taken away from this world that July. It was July 22nd, a normal Sunday. The whole family went to church together. Then afterwards, Bill would go and play golf with his friends. Hayley would go to the beach with her friends, and then Jennifer and Michaela would also go to the beach, but they also needed to go to the store to get ingredients for Michaela to make dinner that night. So they kind of all separated, and then they knew that at dinner time they would all come back together. They would watch some TV before going to bed. That was a normal Sunday for them. And so that is exactly what happened. They all went home, they had dinner together, and Michaela made this wonderful pasta dish, and then they went to sleep around 11 p.m. Around 10 a.m. the next morning, which was July 23rd, a neighbor heard a knock on their door. When they answered, they did not recognize the man who was outside because he was severely beaten. They immediately went to call the police, but then they noticed that there was actually police cars that were unmarked and some that were marked around the neighborhood. When they walked out further, they noticed that a home was on fire. And there was also a car, a regular car, and a police car that had the front of the cars smashed in as though they had gotten into an accident. This neighbor had no idea what was going on. This was a home at 300 Sorghum Mill Drive, and that wasn't the only thing that had occurred. This fire wasn't. This neighbor had no idea if there was anyone inside this home, but he knew that the Pettit family lived there. And he also then realized that Bill Pettit was the one outside of his door. You see, investigators had been contacted an hour prior to go to this home. There had been a call from a bank teller at the local bank, and this woman claimed that there was a woman who came into the bank named Jennifer Pettit, and she had requested $15,000 to be taken out of her own account. That is when she slid a note to the teller saying that her children and husband were being held hostage inside of their home. Now, she told this teller that they seemed very nice, these men who were holding her, and like they just wanted the money, and she was very hopeful about it. But this teller knew she was telling the truth because she had that look in her eye, a look that was from one mother to another. This bank teller immediately ran to the back in her office, turned out the lights, and called the police. However, at the same time, Jennifer left with the money and went back out to the car and sped away. Well, she didn't, but the men driving did. The investigators immediately headed to the Pettit family home and set up a perimeter and unmarked cars so that the robbers couldn't see them. They also went up in person and hid behind the trees because, like I said, it was kind of a suburb area, but there was kind of a little woodsy area too, and there was lots of trees, and so they were hiding behind those, peering near the home. And they were also investigating the possibility that Jennifer was complicit due to being so calm at the bank. However, I'm not sure where they got this from because the bank teller said that she was petrified. Shortly after setting up their perimeter, the investigators began hearing screams inside of the home. Yet no one made a move. They were told not to. And so they watched while not long after this, the home went up in flames. At the same time, the Pettit's SUV pulled out of the driveway and began speeding down the road. At this point, the cops were chasing them and they got into an accident with this SUV, but it made the car have to stop. And so that is when they got out and they arrested the people inside. This was unfortunately not the Pettit family. No one inside was. This was two strange men. By the time the fire department got to the scene and put out the fire, it was too late. Everyone inside was already dead. Now, they knew that there was most likely family members inside, and they found two bodies first before finding another. They were all females, And while they were being found, investigators rushed Bill to the hospital while they brought out who they believed to be Jennifer, Hayley, and Michaela. Tents were set up in the rain to investigate further. The media was swarming the scene. They were saying they didn't know much, they wouldn't say much, and the bodies of the 3 girls were taken in for autopsies. Now, Jennifer's body was actually found to be strangled. She was killed by asphyxiation, by strangulation, but Hayley and Michaela actually died from smoke inhalation. Michaela was found tied to her bed, unable to escape. Jennifer's body was found to have been sexually assaulted, and so was Michaela. However, Hayley was not sexually assaulted. She had actually gotten free of where she had been tied to her own bed, and she got to the top of the stairs before dying from the smoke. While Bill was in the hospital, Jennifer's parents actually went to see him, and that was his in-laws. And, he began sobbing, saying he was so sorry that he couldn't save them all. And they just told him, we're just happy you survived. There was nothing you could do. And he was a complete mess. And the injuries to his head were so severe, they actually had 3-inch openings. And it was going to take him quite a while to recover. He had been bludgeoned almost to the point of death. Yet he was determined to talk at the girl's funeral 5 days later, and that's exactly what he did. He needed help to stand up and go up there, but he wanted to do it. He wanted to do it for them, and because they didn't have a voice anymore. And he stood up there, he told the story of how he met his wife, about his daughters, and he wanted to thank everybody for their help in this investigation and for just being there for him. Bill was, of course, talked to by investigators, and the thing was, they weren't looking into him as a suspect, even though he had survived. He had such brutal injuries that there was no way that he could have done this, inflicted those upon himself, and then got out of the home. That just wasn't even an option. But they wanted to know the timeline of what had happened that night, that early morning, and how this could have happened and what he saw. Now, he said that the night prior, the family ate together a meal that Michaela had put together. Then they sat down in the living room to watch TV, and he fell asleep in the chair like you normally did, like most dads did while they were watching TV. And when he woke up, he actually realized that they were all asleep. It was the middle of the night, and he didn't want to bother Jennifer by getting into the bed. So he decided just to go back to sleep there. However, the next time he was woken up, he was being beaten over the head. He was bound at the wrists and ankles, and he was beaten to the point of going in and out of consciousness. So he couldn't stand, he couldn't fight. At one point, he heard Jennifer asking if she could take her purse because they would notice that it was strange if she didn't, but he didn't know necessarily what they were talking about. He was actually taken down to the basement and attached to the pole, and that is when, a little while later, before the house went up in flames, he actually got out of this pole and he hopped up the basement stairs and out into the backyard. And that is when he escaped. He had to roll across the yard till he got to the neighbor's front porch to ask for help, and he immediately told him that his girls were still inside. Investigators didn't even notice him, even though they were all around the yard and all around the neighborhood, because they were busy catching his family's killers who had just sped away. Jennifer's sister had been trying to get a hold of her all morning. They were trying to plan a beach vacation together. She wasn't answering. Another neighbor drove past early that morning around 4:30 a.m. and saw nothing out of the ordinary. And so when they saw this on the news that this had happened, they felt horrific for not seeing anything, for not noticing anything, because it was believed that this had started to happen around 3 a.m. And so they felt a pit in their stomach that they hadn't been able to help. While the killers were booked, the investigators realized they were very familiar with this process because both had a very lengthy criminal record. This was 26-year-old Joshua Komisarjevsky and 44-year-old Stephen Haynes. Now, Joshua had been born to a 26-year-old who soon gave him up for adoption, and the Komisarjevsky family adopted him into their home. They began homeschooling him. He was said to be extremely intelligent, and he had a photographic memory. He was doing really well, but when he was 10 years old, his sister said that he did sexually assault her. Now, His first burglary occurred when he was 14 years old, and he had been arrested for 18 different home invasions throughout the years. In 2002, 5 years before the murders, he was tried for 12 counts of burglary. At this point, he told his lawyers that he broke into homes, and sometimes he would actually stay in the bedrooms where the owners slept and listen to them breathe. And he enjoyed the feeling of invading people's homes and violating their security. Now, he remembered every little detail of his crimes, exactly what he did, and his attorney told the judge that he needed to be watched. He said, "You're either never going to see him again, or he's going to be the worst criminal to pass through these doors." He was also remorseful, though, and apologized for his crimes, but the court couldn't decide if he actually was honest and emotional or a very good manipulator. But the judge ended up saying that Joshua was a predator, a calculated, cold-blooded predator, and he had some sort of mental abnormality that needed to be addressed. Now, he was sentenced to 9 years at this point with 6 years special parole, but he also had a daughter the same year by one of his girlfriends. Then he was released only 5 years into his sentence, and this was in April of 2007 when the parole board actually weren't given all the details to his case. They weren't even given his case file before they paroled him. He then went to stay at the Silliman halfway house before being released into the public. And at this point, his daughter had nowhere to go because his ex-girlfriend was going into rehab for a drug addiction, so his parents ended up watching his daughter while he was, getting out of the halfway house. Joshua had also found a new girlfriend by this point. She was 18 and he was 26. And her name was Caroline, and her father did not approve of Joshua. He said that Joshua kind of hinted at wanting to marry Caroline, and he said, "I believe that you are a predator and that you only like my daughter because she looks so young," and that he also was a criminal, and he just was not comfortable with Joshua near his daughter. But she was 18 and he could do nothing about it. Caroline said that they were planning on getting married and that they also had rough sex where he would tie her up, but he always made sure she was very comfortable, and he was also very romantic. At this point, he was also struggling with a crystal meth addiction. Yet his friends said that he was great, he was artistic, and he wanted a better life than he had previously had. Stephen Hayes, on the other hand, had grown up in a very normal family. His parents had divorced, but he had siblings. Yet those siblings said that he was a very manipulative person even when he was a child. He would do bad things, but he would always blame them, and then everyone would believe him because he was that good. He even, when they were older, pressed a revolver against his brother's head. He was convicted as an adult when he was 16 years old, and he was given 2 years. I couldn't find for what this crime was, but most of them did have to do with, robbery. And 3 years prior to the murder, he actually smashed in a car window just to steal a woman's purse. He was a recovering crack addict, and he had a daughter named Alicia who said that she didn't really get to see her father, but they would often write when he was in jail. And, he actually was once married to her mother, but they did end up getting a divorce. Now, Stephen was already in the Silliman house, the halfway house, when Joshua arrived. 4 months after the murders, a gag order was put in place for the lawyers, the police, and the witnesses to be unable to talk to the media. The entire community was terrified. They began putting in alarm systems, little safe rooms in their houses, because that was a horrifying thing. This had happened within someone's home, a place where you were supposed to feel the safest. But many people began blaming the police for not doing enough, including the Pettit family. They believed that they could have done something to save the girls. They were sitting out there for 30 minutes before that house went out in flames, and they didn't do a thing. But investigators, on the other hand, said that that's what they were told to do, that's what they were trained to do, and that they knew that it could go really bad if they marched in. They feared that the killers, who were just robbers at this point, would take it to killing if they saw police and the police went in. So they didn't do anything, but the Pettit family believed that they could have at least tried and that it would have saved the girls. They also listened as the girls screamed and were tortured, and they just wonder how they can live with themselves after hearing that and standing still. The family members also said that the police actually never officially talked to them and told them what happened. They kind of just had to go from, what the media said and what they could find on their own. After these murders happened, the governor actually ordered electronic monitoring of paroled burglars and banned parole for violent offenders and ordered a review of convicts who had been paroled. A year later, candles were actually lit in front of every home, and so was a huge sign that said hope. In 2008, the Pettit family home was demolished and was turned into a memorial garden for the girls, but Bill couldn't sleep for months afterwards because he had been sleeping when this had occurred. But the whole community, especially Bill, was waiting for these two men to go to trial and to be convicted. So while in custody for the Pettit murders, Stephen was said to be depressed and suicidal, and he didn't know exactly how any of this happened. He claimed he only believed that they were going into this family home to get money and goods and to rob them, but he didn't think that anyone was going to get hurt. He said that they were going to take them out, tie them up to the car, and then burn the home down to get rid of the evidence, but everyone was still going to be alive. But he did describe everything that happened that night, and his daughter Alicia came forward saying that she knew everything he did prior. She knew he wasn't this angel, but she didn't believe he would go this far. However, Joshua's family immediately disowned him, saying that they heard about this and that he was a monster, because investigators had gone to them saying, Joshua is being investigated for a home invasion, and they said, a home invasion? This was murder. His parents ended up having to post a note on the home saying that they had the deepest sympathy for the Pettit family and could not understand why something like this happened, and they had to do this because media was just swarming their home. But Joshua said that this was just a home invasion gone terribly wrong, that he saw the family and thought that they would have a nice home, a nice car, and it would be nice to live there someday, so he decided to rob them. Now, around the time of the murders, right before, both Stephen and Joshua were employed, and they appeared to be normal citizens, as long as you didn't look into their long criminal history. But the truth was that behind their facade of smiles and family, they were plotting their next crime. You see, they were employed, but at random jobs that didn't make them much money. Joshua really wanted to see Caroline, his girlfriend, but she had moved away, and he knew that in order to get to her, he would need some more money. So he decided that he was going to rob a home. He then thought of his friend Stephen, who he had met at the halfway house, and he contacted him. Now, Stephen was right in the middle of taking his life when he got this call and decided to go with Joshua. Joshua and Stephen said that 2 days before the murders, they had done a test run. And Joshua was actually the one to break in and show Stephen how easy it would be. And so immediately Stephen was in and ready to rob an entire family. And so with very little preparation, the next day they were ready to pull off their plan. The next day, that afternoon, they were at a supermarket when they found two girls that they believed were their targets. This was Jennifer and Michaela shopping for Michaela's dinner ingredients. They had no idea they were being followed home, and as Bill said, the evening went as planned. You see, Stephen and Joshua had actually followed them home and then went back to their own homes to wait until nightfall. Stephen texted Joshua that he was chomping at the bit to get started, and Joshua said to hang on, he was putting his kid to bed and to hold his horses, and Stephen said that the horses wanted to get loose. They then headed back to the Pettit family home around 3 a.m. with a gun and a baseball bat. Bill was the first person that they came in contact with in the living room sleeping. That's when they began bludgeoning him, but they were also telling him that they only wanted money and they weren't going to hurt anybody. They then said, "Where is the safe?" And Bill began to tell them, "We don't have a safe." And they really didn't. But they didn't believe them, so they tied him up and went to go ask somebody else. That is when they went and they tied Jennifer to her bedpost and put a pillowcase over her head. They also did the same with Michaela, but she had actually fallen asleep next to her mother, so they drug her out of that bed, put her on her bed, and tied her up to her bed. They did the same to Hayley. Bill was then taken from the living room, forced down to the basement, tied to that pole, and covered with blankets. He was bleeding profusely at this point. He was barely conscious. And Stephen and Joshua then began to search this home looking for money or for the safe, and in case they were lying, but they really didn't have any money or cash lying around. And that is when they found a bank statement for $30,000 from their account, and they came up with a new plan. So they untied Jennifer and they were taking her to the bank. However, the bank was yet to be open because remember, it was 3 a.m. So they continued to torture this family until 9 a.m. came around and they could take her. They told Jennifer not to tell anybody about this, and if the police came, they would kill her husband and girls. And they told her that they wanted $15,000. But first, they needed to stop at a gas station, and surveillance footage actually showed that these men had gone in and gotten 2 plastic cans and filled them up with $10 worth of gas. After the money was obtained from the bank, little did they know that they were being followed as they went home by unmarked police cars. Now, unfortunately, it was found that the screams officers heard were screams of 11-year-old Michaela as she was being sexually assaulted by Joshua. He then took pictures of her naked body to show to Stephen and to tell him to do the same to Jennifer, and he did, pushing her down on the floor. Meanwhile, Joshua had found that Bill had escaped out through the basement, and he went to Stephen, who then looked out the window and saw the unmarked police car and knew what was going on, and immediately said he lost it and began strangling Jennifer. He then poured gasoline all over her body and all over the home and lit a match. Now, Stephen and Joshua blamed the other for actually lighting the fire and striking the match, but Joshua said he asked Stephen if he was really contemplating burning 2 girls alive, and then he said he did it. Both men agreed to a plea bargain that meant that they would get life without the possibility of parole instead of death. However, the prosecution said that they were going for the death penalty no matter what. So 3 years after the murders in 2010, Stephen was taken to trial for 7 counts of sexual assault, murder, kidnapping, and arson. Stephen was actually put in a safe cell where he was forced to put on Ferguson clothing, which I didn't know about, but it's actually clothing that you can't tear, so you can't make something to take your own life, because he was on suicide watch. His lawyer was trying to tell the court that life would be worse for him because he would be tortured every day instead of just being put to death. The jury had to be offered counseling because of the psychological trauma and the disturbing evidence that they were being shown, including little Michaela's body. Stephen was found guilty on 16 of the 17 counts and sentenced to death. He said, "Death for me will be a welcome relief, and I hope it will bring some peace and comfort to those who I've hurt so much." Yet that same year, Stephen began writing to a pen pal in prison, a woman named Lynn. And that's when he confessed to her that he had killed 17 women and teenage girls in the New England area. And he would pick them up as hitchhikers, take them back to their home, kill them, and take their shoes as trophies. Now, he said he would videotape them and then torture them. Oddly enough, when investigators had gone through his belongings, they had found several pairs of women's sneakers. But no one could confirm that this was true. Joshua's trial was the next year, and he was found guilty of all 17 counts and was also sentenced to death. He said, "I will never find peace within. My life will be a continuation of the hurt I caused. The clock is now ticking, and I owe a debt I cannot repay." Now, Joshua said that he had a foster brother who was 11 years older than him that sexually assaulted him when he was 14 years old. Now, this man is registered now as a sex offender, but the psychologist testified that this had nothing to do with the Cheshire murders and wasn't the cause of it. Many people are unfortunately sexually assaulted every day and turn out to be the most beautiful people. But it was found that Joshua had written in his diary an entry called "The Humanity's Social Hypocrisy," and he said, "A thief in the night, I've come to steal not jewels and money, but your personal safety, privacy, and security. I violate your inner asylum of intimacy, striking out with all the hate I have for myself projected onto you. Senseless insanity derived from desperation and all its doom. The hounds of hell have come for my life, payment due. The Pettit family passed through their fears and into the calm waters of object terror, like mesmerized rabbits cornered by a spring predator, to see that fear, that emotional pain I feel inside every day, manifested on another's face, validates that this pain in me is real. Survivor Bill said that the whole criminal justice system is known to be the best system in the world in America, but it's maddening at best. Both of the death sentences were reduced to life sentences in 2015 due to Connecticut abolishing the death penalty, and these two were placed in separate prisons for safety and security. Stephen's brothers mentioned that they wouldn't mind if he was put to death because that's how horrible he was to them, and Stephen was saying that he was guilty and he would not appeal because he didn't want the family to go through another trial. But at the same time, Joshua was trying to end his life in his jail cell by hanging. He then appealed his case and was fighting for a retrial. He said that his trial shouldn't have taken place in Cheshire due to the media exposure and the jury knowing a lot more about this case than they should have, and that he was unfairly painted as the mastermind. This was eventually denied, but by 2019, Stephen actually came out as transgender and began undergoing hormonal therapy in prison. The lone survivor, father and husband Bill, had quit being a doctor at this point, and he went on to focus on the Pettit Family Foundation to help those with chronic illness. He also was helping with the 14 Scholarship Fund of the Chase Collegiate College and Hayley's Hope and Michaela's Miracle MS Memorial Fund. He took on what his daughters and his wife were so passionate about, and he continued it for their legacy. Bill actually went on Oprah to talk about how he's dealing with all of this, and he said he would have never got through it without the help of the rest of his family, and that he was in the hospital when he officially found out they were dead, and he couldn't stop throwing up and sobbing. He didn't want to believe it, and he really couldn't. A part of him just could not believe that they were gone. He believes that it was chance or luck or fate that he survived, but he doesn't believe that it was God's will because he had a very hard time believing that this was God's plan to take his entire family. However, he does have a happy life today, and he got married 5 years after the murders to a woman that he met while volunteering at the foundation he put together for his family, and they fell in love. Her name is Christine Poloff, and on August 5th of 2012, they got married, and the next year they had a baby boy. So as heartbreaking as what he went through is, and how, that's going to live with him the rest of his life, I'm glad that he has allowed himself to move on, to be happy, and still do so much for Jennifer, Hayley, and Michaela as well. But do you believe the investigators did their job in this case? Could they even have saved Jennifer, Hayley, and Michaela? Do you believe that Stephen and Joshua were remorseful as they were saying at their trials? I tend to think that that was purely manipulation, that everything they were saying was to make sure that they appeared like a better person than they really were. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I think these two boys from a very young age learned how to make people believe their ugliest, evilest lies and knew how to get away with doing horrific things. Even if they did go to jail and go to prison, they got away with it in the ways of making people believe that they were more innocent than they were. And that is the scariest part of all. So remember, if you want to play Ava's Manor, all you have to do is download the link below, and it's completely free. And don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Also, if you want to watch my last video, it is right here. And if you want to watch a playlist of true crime, it is right here. I also have a second channel where I do vlogs, which is called Genuine Gems, so check that out here. Okay, bye.